think that for me, it's the amount of ideas and the amount of healthy tension that get created out of those ideas. You know that your team isn't necessarily optimized if you've got everybody thinking and saying the same thing. So for me, I'm looking for a bit of healthy tension, some different creativity, and some passion behind the ideas that get generated. That's a very tough question. I think, from my point of view, I think innovation comes first, because innovation then can help drive the culture in order for it to be successful. Some people argue that culture is the one that creates innovation, and yes, that's true. So there are different points of view, but I really think that if you can innovate first, you're creating something new. When you create something new, you create a culture around that, both for your clients and for your company. I think 10 years from now will be absolutely incredible. So I think what you'll see is the pervasiveness of artificial intelligence. I think you'll see machine learning. I think you'll see voice being the predominant user of engagement for financial services. So voice will be your biometrics. Passwords will go away. You'll authenticate with your voice. You'll speak to a form factor like Siri or Alexa. They will then in turn take your command and turn it into data and insights that then can execute for you on your behalf. So in other words, it almost becomes like with an open API, machine learning, AI world, you'll get this sense of Alexa or Siri being your form factor, helping you plan your financial future. So I'll give you an example. Suppose I'm a small business, and suppose that on a Friday, I look at my year's results, and I talk to Alexa, and I say, you know what, Alexa, I've had a great year. I'm thinking about expanding to a new postcode or adding a new employee. What do you think? I can have that conversation with Alexa. In an open banking, API, machine learning, AI world, Alexa will crunch away. On Monday when I come back to the office, there'll be 3 reports there for me based on my risk tolerance. So you will see an incredible transformation with AI and machine learning using some kind of voice as authentication and form factor. So AI for me is AI today is very much command driven, right? So in other words, I have to speak as I write, right? So I've got to make sure that I got a noun and a verb, and it's a very structured, command driven experience, right? But that's not intelligence, right? Intelligence is being able to bring it into a conversation, anticipate my needs, and create an environment where the personalization and relevance based on data is something that I interact with. For example, there is a firm in the US run by 3 University of Massachusetts professors. They've claimed that they have created AI based on neurological patterns of the brain. So if that is true, and over time it will be, it's no longer a command-driven experience where I have to think about what I want. It becomes a conversation based on data, based on the way that I think. And so that, I think, is what artificial intelligence is. Not necessarily commands by voice, that's the beginning, but really the intelligence is leveraging how I think, how I converse, and leveraging the data that goes with it. I think the best use, blockchain being an open ledger, I think the best examples would be anything around currency transactions or trades, potentially derivatives, potentially credit default swaps. You look at some of the banking, issues that have happened in the past, and it's been related to transparency and transactions. So what you could do is take transactions that have, that maybe not be clouded in secrecy, but are very ambiguous or require different levels of security, and find a way to create a blockchain ledger for those kind of experiences. Opportunity, without a doubt. The challenge is also there, but the opportunity is for banks as well as fintechs to become much more collaborative, create a much better financial services experience for businesses and for clients. Financial services is the lifeblood of an economy. And I think banks have been relatively complacent over time because they haven't the moat is so big, right? When you look at the UK, before PSD2, I think it had been 50 years since a banking license had been applied for. Now there's 5 or 6 or 7, if I recall, in relatively recent times. That competition is healthy, right? And it forces banks to rise to the occasion to create a brilliant experience, just like our fintech competitors will do. Everybody needs banking, not everybody needs a bank. I think it's interesting because I think the branch experience is one that no one can really predict, right? So a lot of fintechs don't have branches. So what do branches look like 10 years from now in an AI-dominated world with machine learning? Is there still a human connectedness? Is the branch going to be the one factor that banks have that fintechs don't? If banks are successful creating a brilliant omni-channel experience as opposed to a digital one only, is there a need for a human connectedness? So even though I might get brilliant advice from an AI-dominated world, will I still want to talk to someone? Will I still want to talk about I'm opening up my first business or I'm hiring my first employee, right? And that personal connection through a branch is fantastic. 99.9% of the time, I will want to engage digitally to run my business. That 1/10 of 1% where it's monumental in the life of my business, I probably want to have a conversation. If I can do that face to face, then that's interesting to me in terms of whether or not the world operates that way, or we become so accustomed to AI that the day-to-day interaction isn't necessary, and so branches become dormant in terms of all of the real estate that banks have and what they do with it. I think they do, right? So as I said earlier, is the quid pro quo branches or the I guess the mill around the bank's neck, and it's not necessarily going to go play to their favor? I don't think so. It's interesting. With robo-advice and wealth, during the financial crisis, there are banks in the US that were leveraging robo-advisors, right? Giving them up-to-date information about trades, managing their portfolios. But when a seismic event happens, right, they don't listen to their robo-advisor. They pick up the phone and they want to talk to someone, right? So when things are going relatively well and my risk tolerance is within my margin, then I'm fine. But when things don't go well or they go outside my margin and I begin to freak out a bit, I want to talk to someone. And so I think those occasions is where branches will essentially create the value-added proposition that banks have. No one will go to a branch 10 years from now for transaction support, right? That's the AI world, and I think banks that don't do that are at the risk of being disintermediated. But I think branches, and you won't need as many, right? You won't need as many. But I think omni-channel, telephony, digital experience, branch is a very compelling proposition to engage with clients. I think, wow, I mean, there's so many good quotes. I think my favorite is from Aristotle, right? Excellence, or how does it go again? It goes, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. So in other words, excellence is different than perfection, and we are a product of our habits. And so if we try the best that we possibly can in every situation, you essentially get to the point where you're not satisfied with the status quo for yourself. You're trying to do that little bit extra. Start with the client first, right? Learn from our mistakes. And our mistakes were we thought, you know what? We have a back office process or a branch process. Let's digitize it. Problem with that is that the processes were never optimized. They relied on people. So when you tried to put that into a digital channel, it failed miserably. The experience was horrific. What do fintechs do? They start with the experience with the customer or client and then work their way in terms of what the automation and any back end of processing should be. So from our point of view, we want to start mobile first, of course, but not mobile only. Create a brilliant experience on that screen so I can consume that with a tablet, with a desktop. And if I can do that, then it will be intuitive to a colleague, as opposed to an experience that's so heavily colleague-centric that requires a lot of people a lot of paper, and lack of automation, and try and render that from a digital point of view, it will fail. There's a lot of apps, there's a lot of websites, a lot of apps that banks produce where the functionality is there, but it's not used. And it's not used because it's either difficult, or I can't discover it, or it's clumsy or clunky. Just because I can do it online doesn't mean I will if the experience isn't brilliant. I don't know if it's the future, but they are certainly a challenger, right? The whole concept of payments is fascinating when you think of potentially invisible payments, right? So certainly WhatsApp is an example of what could happen in that space. But I'll give you another use case. What if cars start having chips which allow you to pay for petrol when you pull up at a station, right? The whole concept of invisible payments, what that looks like, where is the domain? Because when you think about it, right, there is no 800-pound gorilla dominant in the payment space, right? I mean, I look at my own behavior. Sometimes it's contactless, sometimes it's Apple Pay, sometimes it's cash, sometimes it's direct debit. Maybe I write the occasional check to my daughter's piano teacher, right? So there isn't necessarily a go-to payment device, but I think invisible payments and payments being frictionless in the experience is potentially where we could go. Certainly those companies have an opportunity from a challenger point of view to take us in that space. But ultimately, going back to experience, just what I talked about financial services and the experience, the payments experience is also important. And that, I think, is going to lend itself towards invisible payments.